hardware. Yeah, like I have one that they all like change the colors. They all do like really cool effects without coloring. Really, they're really cool.
Yeah. So I told Jess, like, this is my first time wearing glasses and a mask. I now know it sucks. So I might change in between masks periodically because I dislike this one and I dislike this one.
Well,
So yeah.
like it all.
Yeah, but I couldn't put my contacts in today. My eyes were too dry. It burns so bad. I cried.
I use one a lot. It's like I literally can't do it.
Yeah, so just heads up on that. I'm gonna preface with that. I'm probably end up switching back and forth on occasion. We'll see how long this one goes because it's a little bit easier to wear than this one. I have to like hold this one on because it doesn't want to sit there with the glasses on. But a little recap of yesterday. We did start Egypt yesterday. Some of the things that were important with Egyptians. Does anyone remember?
The sun, that, afterlife,
Yes.
and a show of welcome.
Yes, very good. And that is pretty much the recap. We talked about, thank you, Grace. We talked about the Palette of Narmer. That was the first artwork we covered, Narmer being the guy accredited for uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. We have some lovely hierarchic scale shown there, and we're going to see more of that today. We talked about all of the different kinds of pyramids leading up to, of course, the Great Pyramids, and we finished yesterday with the Sphinx. So very, very brief recap there. Today we're picking back up with mummies as promised. This is a whole bunch of random facts. You don't need to know all of them. It's just random facts that I found interesting because it's interesting. So it wasn't until the 4th dynasty that Egyptians actually began using the proper mummification process that we're familiar with today. So it didn't start off like that. We've talked about the Ka. The Ka is your spiritual life force that continues on after your death. The whole reason for mummies is to try and preserve your body to be a house for the Ka. Of course, like I mentioned yesterday, they often had statues to accompany just in case something happened to the body later on, so that your Ka had a place to go. Mummification is a very long process. It takes about 70 days. Yeah, 70 days to do a proper mummification, which begins with removing important organs and placing them in canopic jars, which usually had heads of important deities on them for the respective organ. The brain was discarded because it was considered not to be important. Yeah.
Take the brain.
Okay.
It was taken out from your nose with a hook and tossed away. The most important organ to them was the heart. That was the main organ that held your spirit and everything else that your body needed. So yeah, the heart was left intact and not messed with. They did not take out the heart. Left there. It was thought that the heart was where your intelligence was stored. Got some stupid people in the afterlife, huh? No brains. But yeah, the next 40 days after removing those organs, the body would be treated in a lot of different salts and preservatives to just try and leach all of the water and moisture out as much as possible to preserve it. Then it would be covered in lotions and resins to make it smell good and look nice, and wrapped in hundreds of yards of fabric. Often within the fabric, they would insert jewels and scarabs, as well as a copy of the Book of the Dead to travel along with the body into the afterlife. Yeah, like I said, a bunch of random facts, but I thought they were kind of cool. So I thought we would include them. So yeah, as we mentioned yesterday, these people would be buried with a lot of possessions that they might need in the afterlife. So a lot of the graves and a lot of the things that we have today are thanks to those graves and what was storing them. Later Egyptians, like I mentioned also yesterday, housed statues with the burial chambers with the mummies so that your ka could live on. And they did bury their cats and dogs with them. Sometimes servants too. So they wouldn't be alone. They'd have all the help they needed. There's other reasons for the cat being buried with them too. Cats have a lot of
When they like
meaning
God,
and importance in Egyptian art. Yes.
when they like a god, no way.
They were a guide, yes. They were a guide through the afterlife. They were also pretty helpful about different things. Egyptians liked to keep cats around because they would eat the mice and other things that would get into the grain. The cats were very important for them. Don't see that too often.
They were buried like with their servants, like, do the servants die and then they put them in there, or are they like, well, I guess the servant's dead, you gotta
They
go too.
would be killed and mummified, just like a cat
Wow.
and the dog.
Yeah, they just kill everyone off.
They aren't the only people group to do this. We're going to talk about later the Chinese. The emperors would have all of their concubines killed when they died and mummified. Yeah, so you would not want your emperor to die if you were a concubine. Yeah.
If you're a servant, like being buried with the pharaoh is probably like a,
It's an honor.
An
Yeah,
honor,
it would
so
be an
like-
honor. You'd get to spend the afterlife with them in their palaces.
yeah.
So it'd be good. It wouldn't be a bad thing. I mean, if you believe in that, it wouldn't be bad. If you don't believe in that, it sucks. Like what? But if you believe in that idea of the afterlife and living the same life that you have, then yeah, it'd totally be okay. Which I'm sure is how most of them felt at that time, since that was their religion. Which takes us into the sculpture of Khafre enthroned. This statue is thought to be one of the statues that would have been built for housing the Ka. This is one of the pharaohs. This is this dude. It's not with a lion's body. He is in a very rigid pose, which is characteristic for Egyptians. He is shown wearing the fake false beard as well as a symbol of being a pharaoh. He is wearing a traditional kilt that normal pharaohs would be wearing. His throne does have two lions holding it up. You can kind of make out their feet there. There's one on each side. And the legs in between have papyrus leaves there and lotus plants, two plants that are native for that area. And he is shown with an interesting body choice. What do you guys notice about his form?
He's very upright and
Yeah.
in a pose.
Yeah. What about his body?
Muscular.
Muscular. Yes, he is young and muscular. All pharaohs, except for Akhenaten, because he changes it, will choose to be shown as a youthful, idealized, muscular male. Did he look like this? Probably not. But this was the way in which they wanted to be shown to the public as those idealized muscular figures. It's an appearance that they're trying to upkeep. And like I said, it's a tradition that's going to carry on for a long period of time. The only one that changes it is Akhenaten, and then right after Akhenaten dies, it goes back to this. Do all of the pharaohs have these perfect muscular forms? Heck no. We have records of most of them looking deformed and having large bellies. So no. It's all about upkeeping appearances for the public view. There are multiple statues of Khafre that have been found around Egypt, so they would have been on display for people. There were statues found in his mortuary temple complex that people went to pray. So statues that are supposed to represent him, but they don't exactly look like him. We're going to see that carried on by multiple cultures to come. That idea of wanting to, for appearance's sake, look muscular and youthful. Because as a leader, you would want to appear to your people as being young, not old, and muscular, not overweight, especially when you're a country that occasionally goes to war. This is made of diorite. Diorite is a very hard, sturdy material, so this was made to stand the test of time, which it did pretty well. This is from the 4th dynasty. It's one of our older artworks that we're going to be talking about. They're on the age when mummification began. Of course, bits and pieces have broken off. I think you probably can notice, like, front part of his leg missing there. And he presumably probably carried a staff in that one hand if you're curious as to why it's just chilling. Okay, some more statues. This one is also from the 4th dynasty. This is Menkore and his queen, or his primary wife. He had multiple wives. This shows you that the idea of a idealized male form as well as rigid poses become the trend in Egyptian art and sculpture. This is technically a high relief sculpture. It is attached to the block, still on the background that it was carved out of. It's not fully in the round. The fun little fact that you might not notice at first glance. And what tends to become the traditional pose for a pharaoh that is standing is fists clenched to the side, and I think it's your left foot, no, right foot. It's your right foot stepping forward. You'll notice she is slightly behind him. That is because social status applies here, and she is less important than him, so she has stepped back a little bit from him. That becomes the formula for all Egyptian statues. That stiff, rigid pose with one foot forward. It is not anatomically correct. It's not trying to be anatomically correct. It's just trying to show that importance and regality to gain respect from the viewers. And of course, just like Khafre, Menkure is also wearing traditional clothing that a pharaoh would wear. Now, if I didn't tell you the names on this statue and this statue, would you know there were two different people? So this one, here's this one.
Yeah.
You can tell they're two different people?
Yeah.
It's slightly different, yeah.
And the muscular. Wait, this one is defined.
They're pretty similar.
Oh, and
They look more defined on him. I think it might just be the light. But they're very, very similar poses. Really, the only difference is the nose and cheekbone structure. And that's pretty characteristic. They will occasionally switch up the facial structures, but at first glance, you might not notice a single difference at all just because they look so similar. Later on in Egyptian art, they don't even change the faces. Yeah, it really does become a mathematical formula that they begin to follow. Pharaohs are more likely to have some facial differences, but once we get to high priests, scribes, there's not going to be any difference. They're just following that rigid formula, which does become a mathematical formula of proportions that they use to fit certain blocks in certain areas. Yeah, something that's very different. This is our seated scribe sculpture. He's my personal favorite just because he doesn't quite fit the mold. This is also from the 4th dynasty. It shows the Egyptians did sometimes paint their sculptures. We do have traces of paint on several sculptures that we're going to be talking about today, but of course they are not painted anymore. This one still has a large amount of its paint, so it's kind of nice to see what it would look like and what some of the others would look like too. A scribe was one of those rare people that could actually read or write, so they ended up becoming a scribe. It's their job. Scribes spend most of their time in a seated position, reading and writing. So he is in his normal work pose there. He is not a noble. He is not a pharaoh. He is a slightly important person, but not nearly as important as the governing officials, which is why he gets to be more relaxed. Yay, go him. So the lower the rank you are in Egypt, the more relaxed and realistic your sculptures can be. Does that mean they are all the time? No, some of them choose to be rigid and stiff because that's what the pharaohs are doing. But you have the option of being more relaxed and realistic the lower you are in rank, which is what the person who commissioned this particular sculpture wanted. He wanted something that showed what he actually looked like. So he is not muscular. He is not youthful. He is not idealized. He has the dad bod. But I mean, if your job is sitting every day, tends to happen. Yeah. A fun one. I like this one. He is holding a papyrus scroll. And he would have had a reed to write with. The reed is gone now. On his lap. He's wearing traditional clothing. And he's got a very focused expression, presumably focusing on whatever he's trying to write down or capture. And of course, just like a lot of the other things we're talking about, this was found in a tomb, possibly his tomb. Which takes us to something else that was found in a tomb, but it is not so much a sculpture as a relief. I mean, reliefs are sculptures, but a very different kind of sculpture than what we've been talking about. This is a low relief sculpture from the Old Kingdom. A lot of Old Kingdom tombs had sculptural reliefs inside of them to decorate them. A lot of the reliefs have to do with the afterlife and events that might take place in the afterlife. So, for example, this image of T, who was an official from the 5th dynasty, shows him triumphing over the forces of evil. Generally, if you have a river scene and you're hunting, the hunting aspect is the metaphor for evil. And if you're killing those things, then you are winning over evil. It's a bit odd for us today, but it's a metaphor. And a lot of these reliefs, at first glance, because I'm saying we're going to be looking at a few throughout this section, most of them, they look innocent, like an activity that you would perform in your everyday life, hunting on the river, being the example here. But most of the time with Egypt, there's an underlying meaning with them. If you're wondering what he's hunting, there's some hippos in there and some fish. Now, what do you guys notice about the composition? Yes, there's more hierarchic scale happening. T is the largest figure. He's actually not even doing anything. He's directing them. The servants are the ones that are actually doing the hunting. So really hitting home his position in society. I don't know if you guys can make it out, but at the top here, there's something interesting happening.
Looks like
Kind of, it does from your angle, yeah. So at the top, there are animals peeking through reeds.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So what the artist did here, there's the animals. There's a fox here that's literally on top of a reed, bending it because a reed can hold the weight of a fox. But anyway, what the artist did is all of these lines here in the background, they represent the reeds. And the boat is going on the river, and there's a whole bunch of reeds off to the side. And inside of those reeds are animal wildlife. So he's created a bit of a landscape painting here with some action going on in the foreground. Does it look like a landscape painting as to what we're used to seeing a landscape painting? No. Do those lines read as plant life at first glance? No, they just look like lines. But lines are not a normal choice for Egyptian sculptural relief. So they must have some sort of purpose. And if you read into it, you can read them as reads. Didn't know we talked so much about a small relief in a minor person's tomb. But yeah, some more sculptures that were found in the tomb of T, same guy. This one represents the passage from life into the hereafter with the idea of running livestock into the farmland. There is a particular thing that is really interesting down here, and I'm going to blow it up for you. Right here, it's kind of washed away. Well, not really washed away, but it's faded. So down here, there's a boy. He has a calf on his back. He's carrying it, a little baby cow. That calf, it's really impossible to see in any of the pictures that I found. That calf, though, is completely twisting its neck around behind him to look at its mom. You can kind of see its mom poking her head up back there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess that leads us like some unknown culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
This is the earliest account in Egyptian art that we have of someone not doing profile view. Particularly for animals. Animals are almost always in profile view for a really long time in a lot of cultures. But instead of doing profile view, the artist tried his hand at another kind of compositional style, one in which the calf's head would be completely turned around. Is it the best interpretation? No, it still looks really flat. But it was a try at something different. And I wish that the paint was still on it so that you could actually see it. I know in the book, it's not even a better image. It's still a really bad image. Now, some more sculpture. Now we are entering into the Middle Kingdom. So from the Old Kingdom into the Middle Kingdom, finally. Around 2150 BCE, the Old Kingdom ends when Egyptians rebel against their pharaohs. Ooh. But finally, Egypt is back under the reigns of the pharaohs in 2040 BCE. So that was pretty short-lived, like 100 years, 110 years. When that happens, the Middle Kingdom begins. The Middle Kingdom lasts roughly 400 years. The art doesn't really change during the Middle Kingdom, so it's really more just the rebellion happens and then it's fixed. Or fixed, I don't know if you want to say it's fixed. The pharaohs are back in control. I don't know if it's a fixture or not. I wasn't alive then. Couldn't tell you if it was good or bad. But yeah, stuff doesn't change too much. There are some differences. You can kind of already make out some of those differences with this head that we have left from Senusret III, one of the pharaohs from the 12th dynasty. So with this bit of sculpture that we have, you can kind of make out there's a big change. Does he look like an ideal youth?
No,
No, what's going on?
really old,
Yeah, yeah,
and that he's been rolling for a while.
yeah. So now you're realizing the change. Do the poses change? No. Do they still prefer having a muscular body? Yes. But the faces change. The faces do change. Architecture. Architecture also changes during the Middle Kingdom. Instead of doing pyramids, they started doing rock-cut tombs. What that means is instead of wasting a whole bunch of time and money and manpower to build giant pyramids, they would take already existing rocks and cut holes into the sides and make a tomb inside of it.
Like a kid.
Yeah, basically a cave. I think of them as a cave. They didn't really change much other than the interior. You can kind of see right from this rock cut tomb from Beni Hassan that they added columns and some pediment well, not really pediments, but frieze areas to hold up the rocks on the side. Most of these tombs are pretty shallow. They would have a columned porch like this one to welcome visitors to the tomb, to the entrance. Obviously, from a lot of these, we don't have too many objects left. There were not really any deterrents to stop people from taking objects, but there are some reliefs and paintings and sculptures that were in these tombs. We're going to take a look at Amenhotep's tomb column inside of it. The tomb had columns in the interior. The columns themselves hold absolutely no architectural structural purposes, though they are purely for decoration. You can kind of tell because one of them is completely missing the center section and that room is still standing. So what they did to do this is they took the actual rock itself and just carved it out. These columns are the actual natural rock from that cave area. Yeah. It does resemble later Greek Doric columns a little bit. Not too much, kind of. I mean, there's fluting and there's not really a base. Doric columns had a capital, though. This one doesn't have a capital. And you can also see the reliefs that would have decorated these tombs. So much more simple tombs than what the Old Kingdom pharaohs had. But yeah, I think this is a cool picture. Now, we're done with the Middle Kingdom already. On to the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom is where a lot of stuff happens. And that's where we're going to be spending most of our time the rest of the class period. The Middle Kingdom ends up falling to the Hyksos people around 1782 BCE. You don't need to know that unless you want to know when that happens. And in the middle of the 16th century, native Egyptian kings take back control from the Hyksos, which marks the beginning of the New Kingdom. It's around the 16th century. This is the grandest period of Egyptian art. So that's why I said this is where we're going to be spending most of our time. This is where most of the art from this section is coming from, is the New Kingdom period. As far as architecture, they continued on with the idea of making rock-cut temples and temples for gods and goddesses and tombs like that. They didn't go back to really making pyramids. They stuck with that. So we're going to see some more rock-cut tombs and temples with the New Kingdom in a second. During the New Kingdom, just to give you a little bit of an idea of how large it was, this is about the size. It was rather large. They finally, well, later on when we get to it, they're going to take over the kingdom of Kush. Kush was a threat to them for quite a period of time. The Kushites will eventually take back control and stuff will change, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Some more rock cut tombs. We're going to start off with Hatshepsut's tomb in Deir el Bahri, which is probably the most grand temple and tomb from the New Kingdom era. It was a temple attributed to Senmut. Senmut, Hatshepsut said, is the god that selected her to be a pharaoh. She was not in line to be a pharaoh at all. So she was married to one of the pharaohs. She was the primary wife and technically his sister, but she didn't give him any sons. His concubine gave him sons. So it's supposed to be the concubine's son that inherited the title pharaoh, but Hatshepsut said that Senmut and her father said that she was supposed to be the next pharaoh. So she basically kicked that kid out and got rid of him and took over. Some people like Hatshepsut, some people don't. It was the most affluent era for Egypt. They were at their most well off when she was pharaoh. Does that have to do so much with her? I don't know. It just happened to be a really good year of harvest years of harvest when she was in power. And they made a lot of money with trade. She did have some to do with it because she did conquer some more lands and add to those trading routes. But yeah, when she died, or before she died, she started having this temple complex built. There are technically 3 levels to it, or terraces that are connected together by ramps. You can't quite see the most lower one down here. But you go through each temple. Each temple is covered in reliefs and has statues inside of it, dedicated to Senmut and Hatshepsut throughout. And then, of course, in the back is where her specific tomb would have been. This also would have had a garden included outside of it with a lot of plants and people to take care of those plants. There were servants that lived and worked there just to maintain it. After the next pharaoh takes over, a lot of it's going to get destroyed. Like I said, not everyone liked her. For obvious reasons, she kind of took over. Some of the reliefs that were in her mortuary temple tell of her success as a pharaoh, such as this expedition to Punt. Punt was known for its wealth, particularly its gold. Many historical accounts said that Punt had an overabundance of gold. So whenever Hatshepsut takes Punt, it's kind of a big deal. They got a lot of money. So here is a relief of what Punt would have looked like. These men, well, this one guy, he is carrying a pile of gold. It's just gold. It's a whole lot of gold. And they are carrying it back to Pharaoh, and along with them are the king and queen coming to pay their respects to Hatshepsut. So the king, relatively normal looking. He kind of looks like a normal Egyptian. The queen looks odd. Any guesses as to maybe why they chose to represent her like that?
I think because Egypt at that same time isn't their queen there. Yeah. So I guess she wanted to portray that one as an ugly looking queen.
Possibly. There's no definitive answer, so
Yeah,
I'm just asking for opinions at this point. So it could have been like, I want to appear as the most beautiful, and she is lesser than. It could be that she's trying to portray Egypt as maybe more sophisticated. Possibly, I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. But that was a stylistic choice, an interesting one. But yeah, it definitely gives you the sense that Hatshepsut felt that she was superior. Because normally we wouldn't make someone look like that. Unless you did it on purpose.
Oh, I did though.
Maybe she really didn't like the queen.
Yeah. It's like deep formation. Because everyone else is fine.
Yeah, everyone else looks normal. Yeah. Maybe she was jealous. I don't know. Who knows? There's a lot of possibilities with that one, but it's odd because it's not your normal formulaic pose for anyone. structurally. So it had to have been a stylistic decision that she told them, do this. Now it makes you wonder why. But hey, anyways, here's Hatshepsut herself. These statues would have been all over those 3 temple complexes. There's different variations of the statue. This is just one of them. There's 200 in total. Do we have all 200? Heck no, because most of them were destroyed. This one itself was also put back together. But in this position, she's shown kneeling, giving her respects. She is not shown as the almighty pharaoh in this pose. She is shown as, okay, I recognize that the gods and goddesses are more powerful than I am. So I'm going to give my respects. She is offering up jars to the sun god Ra. Interestingly enough, though, she is depicted here as a man, not a woman. In fact, a good chunk of the statues and reliefs that we have of Hatshepsut show her as a man, not a woman. There's only a few that show her as a woman, which sometimes leads to historians like, what's going on there? Like, did she want to be shown as a man because men are shown as like considered to be more powerful?
So maybe.
So to gain respect, maybe.
Yeah. God.
Yeah.
Or God.
Some people more recently have wondered, like, did she view herself as a man? Because I mean, that's kind of like a gender issue that's more contemporary. So people are applying that, like, did she want to be seen as a man? Possibly, possibly. Men in this society did have more power and respect, so maybe she did want to be seen as a man. Kind of makes sense to us today. She would have had her cobra headdress, and she would have also had a fake beard. It's just broken off. You can kind of see where it would have sat down here, though. This was destroyed during Thutmose III's reign. In fact, most of this temple complex was destroyed during his reign. He was not a fan. That's not unusual for pharaohs. If they did not like some of their predecessors, they would destroy things or sculptures in order to assert their own authority over them. So it's not totally rare to see, but it is a bit of a statement. That takes us to Abu Simbel, something that is not Hatshepsut. Abu Simbel is pretty cool. They had to move it a while ago in 1968 to build the Aswan High Dam. If they didn't move it, it would be underwater right now. So the idea of moving this entire temple, because it's not just the exterior, they moved the entire temple 700 feet so that it wouldn't go underwater, which is kind of really impressive. I'm glad they did it. Yeah, I know. I don't know how. I think they took it apart piece by piece and reassembled it.
Engineers.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember reading, because I used to have to teach the Aswan High Dam when I taught geography, because it's kind of an important geography thing. But I remember reading that a lot of people didn't want the dam because a lot of these structures would end up underwater. So some people went in and started to preserve them. One of the ways they preserved them was to move them. This isn't the only one that was moved. This is just the biggest and the most impressive. So Abu Simbel is dedicated to Ramses II. Here we have an exterior adorned with 4 colossal statues of himself. They are all Ramses II, 4 times over. They did have to sacrifice a lot of details on these sculptures because of the size. In order to get it that big, you had to sacrifice some of the individualistic characteristics that could have been added. So they look very generic. As I said, this is just the exterior. There is an interior. Yeah. Yeah, they go ahead and let's make some stuff, guys.
Yeah.
They place it throughout the entire kingdom in order to really push home to the inhabitants, like, I am your pharaoh. This is me. It also gives the inhabitants something to, like, okay, this is what you look like. It's weird for us today because we have TV, media, and photographs, so we know what our world leaders look like. Back then, they didn't have that. The only thing they had were statues. So it really gives you a bit of a grounded sense of, like, okay, this is the person who's in charge of my government. So I know what they are. It gives me something to latch onto when I'm thinking about it versus this mysterious creature that you've never seen before. Because most people, they would never see the pharaoh. Never. Of course, I mean, like we said at the beginning, a lot of pharaohs didn't actually look like what they made their statues look like. But hey, it gave the people something. Something to think about, something to worship. And I do say worship. The pharaohs considered themselves to be gods. So the people were expected to praise them like a god. So it would make sense to have statues if we think about it in that terms. It's a god. We're going to have these statues all over the kingdom for you to praise. But yeah, good question. They do immediately, as soon as they become a pharaoh, make a bunch of statues. A bunch. Just placed all over. Yeah, they also begin immediately making their tombs. As soon as they inherit the power, they make their tombs. Tombs are symbols of power, respect, strength for the pharaohs. It's not just about afterlife for them. It's trying to show off. And here is the interior of Ramses II's temple. The temple is 206 feet long, and it is adorned with more statues. His statues in here serve as columns, of course, not real columns. They're also faux columns. They don't support anything. But yeah, more statues. And these statues, in case you're wondering how tall they are 32 feet high. Once again, obviously, because of the size, details have been lost. Well, not really lost, never added. That's a better choice of words here. In another temple complex, this one is not built for a pharaoh, though. This one is dedicated to the sun god Amun-Ra at Karnak. So this entire complex, it's more than one building. It's the whole picture. In fact, more than the picture. It doesn't all fit in the picture. But during the 15th century, building began for this temple complex for Ra, and it didn't finish until the 19th century.
Well,
So, long time. Long time. Most of it was done during the 18th dynasty under Thutmose I and II, as well as Hatshepsut. It does have a 39-foot high wall that surrounds the entire complex and a man-made pool inside of it. That is a man-made pool. And of course, all of the temple complex structures. You can see a large amount of columns. We're going to be talking about in a second specific details at Karnak, because some of these columns, particularly this area, are quite impressive with how they chose to architecturally design it. They are obviously quite big, you can kind of already tell. So at Karnak, those particular, these, in case you weren't paying attention, these guys, these columns, close up. As you can see on these columns are reliefs from top to bottom. The columns themselves at their tallest are 75 feet tall and are about 22 feet in diameter. The temple is set up in an interesting manner though. The normal temples are just your box-like structure. For these temples, they added a clear story. That means that the columns that hold up to this area go up taller. and you have a secondary roof. That secondary roof allows light to get into your temple. That's a clear story. So with this, you can kind of see in the previous picture, some of these columns are taller than the other columns. That is to form that clear story. So when we're talking about the 75-foot tall columns, we're talking about these that hold up the clear story. The other columns are not nearly as tall. That clear story, like I said, Lepton light, we're talking about an era that did not have electricity, so their main light sources came from sun or candles. In order to ensure that there would be a large amount of light so that you could actually see all of these reliefs, they built that clear story. The reliefs are also done in an interesting manner. By the way, this is an axial plan. That just means it's straight. You walk straight in. I forgot to mention that. But the columns themselves are a bit interesting. I think I have a close-up, yeah. So the columns are decorated in what's called sunken reliefs. Sunken reliefs are, you can kind of tell they're sunken into the wall or structure or whatever they're done on rather than raised out. The reason why they did these sunken reliefs is instead of a regular relief that they're usually doing in Egyptian temples and tombs, is so that in order to make these columns, if they did their regular relief, it would be wavy. But because they chose to do that sunken relief, the sides of these columns are still flat. So it was a particular stylistic choice that was made for these columns in order to make them look like normal columns, but still have them decorated. Because in case you've not been paying attention, which I'm pretty sure everyone in here has, the columns that we've looked at so far don't have decoration. This is the first example of them adding decorations to their columns. And that's because it took them some time to figure out how to do it properly without messing up the column structure. The columns are decorated in bands. You can kind of see the bands here. Some of the bands have hieroglyphs. Some of them tell stories of the gods. Some of them tell stories of pharaohs. It just depends on which band you're looking at. Obviously here we see Ra being featured right here. Since it's his temple, makes sense. Questions about Karnak, because it's kind of a interesting one. Now I'm definitely going to show my age. No, I won't show my age. It's embarrassing. Maybe, I don't know. So when I was little, the cartoon movie The Prince of Egypt came out.
Yeah.
And in part of the film, they act like it's where they live, but they show scenes of these particular columns. Yeah.
Oh, I can't remember.
Yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah, that movie's great.
Yeah, it's got a good soundtrack.
So,
It's one song in particular that features these columns in cartoon version without all of the missing pieces. So if you ever get a chance, you might want to check it out. Obviously, it's not realistic because this was a temple for Ra, not the palace. And the movie showcases it as the palace. So yeah, but interesting that they actually did some of their homework for some of the movie. Yeah, it's a fun one. Now, moving on to some more New Kingdom sculptures. Black sculptures end up gaining popularity in the New Kingdom. A little bit easier to do. You just get your block and work with the shape of the block. And really the only details that you add are the heads. You kind of see that. And instead of having a body, they have hieroglyphs to say who it was dedicated to, what it was for, the purpose, such as this one. This is a statue of Senmut and Nefra. Nefra was Hatshepsut's daughter, and Senmut was her chancellor, also lover. She tried to, during her reign, give Senmut a lot of power because she loved him. And This statue was made for that purpose, to try and show how close he was and important he was in her family's life and why he should have power, because he's important to her. She can't do this without him. Partners. That kind of vibe. There's a few of these that have been made, but in case you're trying to figure out who's who, this is Senmut, and in his lap, wrapped around in his arms under this block, is the daughter Nefra. He was very close to Nefra. Some people think it might be his kid. Possibly. We don't know. No DNA testing. But yes, most of the concentration has been focused on the head and details. Obviously, Nefra is shown as much smaller. She was the child, so kind of a little bit of scale going on. Was she this small when this was made? Who knows? Probably not. But it does help to serve as a way to elevate Senmut's status. Having multiple copies of this made and positioned around the kingdom helps to show that he is obviously important. Normal people wouldn't have a bunch of statues like this made. And as I said, all of the detailing on it states why it was made, who he is, to really add to the importance, to make sure everyone understood. So yeah, block sculptures, they gain popularity in the New Kingdom. That ships us towards the beginning of the New Kingdom. They stick with it. It's a bit of a cheaper way to make things too, less time consuming. Trends that do continue on from Old, Middle, and into New Kingdom are tomb reliefs and paintings. This is from the Tomb of Nebuchadnezzar. If you've taken Art Appreciation, you've seen this one before, but it's important because it's really highly detailed and a lot of the color's still there. So we're going to look at some of the paintings from his tomb. This is just the first one. Nebuchadnezzar was a scribe, and his job was to count the grain. In this painting, he is in the process of hunting birds. So here you can see the reeds. He's on a boat. There's fish underneath, and the birds are flying up. I love the cat here. A lot of people miss the cat. I'm obsessed with cats. You probably caught on to that. Once again, the cat is chilling on top of a reed. That's normal. In the boat, there is Nebuchadnezzar, his wife, and their daughter. The text right under his arm here in black says that this is an activity that he is enjoying in the afterlife. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of tomb paintings and reliefs are done to show what's happening in the afterlife, such as this one. So it's a trend that's carried on through many dynasties in Egypt. And of course, it does use hierarchic scale. Now, this is a little bit different from T's. In T's relief, he was an overseer, and the slaves actually did the hunting. In this one, Nebuchadnezzar is the one that's actually doing the hunting. So a very similar format and theme, but a little bit different too. Some more scenes from the Tomb of Nebuchadnezzar. This one most likely depicts the festival honoring the dead. So for important members of the family, every year there would be a festival honoring their dead. So they would go to the tombs and have music. Yeah, kind of like the Day of the Dead that we have here. So here's that festival. We have the family up here sitting, being served. There's some hierarchic scale happening here. The servant's a lot smaller than the seated figures that are considered to be more important. What's more interesting is down on this bottom panel. So here we have 4 women that are seated. They are not in profile view. They are looking at you as they're probably like gossiping or talking is what it looks like. And over here is something else that's very interesting. What's going on? What does it look like going on with those 2 girls? They're dancing, yeah. They are dancing. So we have movement being shown. They're not stiff, they are moving, or at least implied motion happening. They are the only figures that are nude. You'll notice this one, a slave, these two dancers, that shows their status in society. They are not clothed like the higher ranking members. They're also smaller. But yeah, we have movement. They're not separated either, they're entwined. So some different compositional choices than normal. If you're catching on, most of this is talking about, well, we introduced at the beginning normal composition for Egypt, and now we're getting into things that have popped up that we found that are a little bit different. They're kind of interesting to look at. Are they the norm? No. But we've seen them, and it tells us a little bit more about Egyptian artisans, that they could do things outside of that formula. They just didn't most of the time, but they could. Such as with the birds and fish and cat here. Obviously, the birds and fish and cat are much more realistic looking than the people. There's more detail. They look more individualized than Nebamun does, even though he's the main character of this story. So it tells us that the Egyptians could do those things. They just chose not to. Something happens in the New Kingdom. Akhenaten happens. Akhenaten's going to shake things up. We're going to lose for his reign all of those formulas and strict poses and normal rules for art and architecture. Well, mostly for art. His architecture didn't really change much. After Nebamun was he was a scribe. So shortly after he died, Akhenaten ends up taking over control of Egypt. Nebamun was not a pharaoh. This is just to give you an idea of timeline. Akhenaten wanted to switch from polytheism. It kind of mentioned that yesterday in the video. Polytheism was normal for Egypt. They had many gods and goddesses. Akhenaten wanted just one. He wanted the sun god Aken. The sun god Aken is not to be confused with Ra. Ra is the dude with the falcon head. Aken is represented by a disc in Egyptian hieroglyphs and pictorial reliefs. He has no body. He is just a disc. The sun, basically. It looks like the sun, just without rays. When he wants to go to monotheism, he forces everyone else to do it as well. He gets rid of all of the polytheism that exists in Egypt. He even goes as far as moving the capital to a different location and renaming it Aken after Aken. He changes his name to Akhenaten after Aken. He even changes the art style. So Aken, like I mentioned, is a sun disk. It has no body. Therefore, it has no gender. You're seeing where I'm going here, looking at this picture, probably. He wanted the art to reflect that. So, and this is all speculation because there's no definitive answer. Like I said, Aken has no gender. This is really all art historian speculation. We don't know for sure. Most art historians believe that is the reason why most of the figures that we see from Akhenaten's reign are a bit androgynous. Because he himself wanted to reflect Aken, which had no gender. So originally people thought he had like some sort of medical issue that made his body look like this. And he just wanted things to look more realistic. But scientists have ruled that out. He did not have any illness or disease or disformity that made him look like this. But what do you guys notice about him? Is he
powerful looking?
Yeah, he still looks powerful, so he
Very
still has that
powerful.
authority.
But
He's not as rigid.
very mystical almost.
Kind of mythical.
Not
realistic.
mythological, but
Not real.
like
Yeah.
a genie.
Yeah, he does look like a genie. That's a good one. I hadn't heard that one before. He does look like a genie though. What else do you guys notice about his body in particular? No muscles. Got rid of that. What
You
else?
know what I'm saying?
He's got a tummy.
Looks like a skirt.
Yeah. His arms are crossed instead of to the side. Yes. So a different pose.
Taller, I mean, on the head.
He looks more linear.
But on the head,
Yeah.
they actually have like a power.
Yeah. He has a crown, an actual different crown from everyone else. Yeah. His lips are a lot larger than all of the others that we've talked about. His face is longer. His neck is longer.
That's all more detailed.
What'd you say, Jeff? He does look like he's smiling. He's not got that serious facial expression that the others have had. He's also got hips. He has curves. Yeah. So very different. Very, very different. Like I said, there's no certain answer why he chose to portray himself like that, but we have ruled out that he did not look like that by examining his mummy. But yes, interesting stylistic choices. Do you guys think this is progressing and advancing in Egyptian art or regressing?
Regressing.
Why?
Well, not far after this is why. I mean, it's because this is like one of the last rings, I would say.
It was one of the later ones, yeah.
So one of the near the end.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and not for something, I think it regressed a little bit.
Okay. Anyone else? Trying different things, yeah. It looks a little bit more realistic. Does it look exactly like a human body? No, but it does show like imperfections. Yeah, there is no right answer. I was just curious.
Yeah. With them switching to one god.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of changes.
The whole Egyptian history.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thousands of years. Yeah. So big major changes happening in government, religion, and the art all at one time. Most people did not support Akhenaten and his changes, but we'll look at some more changes. This is Nefertiti. This is Akhenaten's primary wife. This style of art with these long necks and kind of deformed bodies is the Armana style. That's what it's known as.
They put rings around their neck, right?
Not this people group.
Oh, no, this one?
No. You're thinking of, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if
Yeah.
it was.
There are people, groups, and cultures that wear rings to stretch their necks out to make them look like this.
Yeah, it's like Africa, I think, somewhere
Yeah.
in Asia.
Yeah.
Like a lot of indigenous tribes.
Yeah.
do it.
Nefertiti's neck didn't actually look like this though. The artist chose to do this to try and give her a flower stalk appearance or a graceful appearance. So he stretched and elongated her neck out and thinned it out to make it look a little bit more feminine and graceful. Was this bust done as a finished piece? No, it was most likely done as a study. It was never actually like meant for display, but it is the primary piece that we have of Nefertiti and the one that everyone usually thinks of. It's not finished. This eye socket is not missing. It was just never added. Her ear is broken off on each side though. So the last wife that we talked about Hatshepsut. What do you think about this in comparison to Hatshepsut's statue?
This one actually has a lot of variation of colors.
Yeah, so we have something that looks like skin. Of course, Hatshepsut sits with stone, so big difference there. And we have something that has more realistic looking facial structures. Does the neck look realistic? No, but the rest of it does. This is not the only bust we're looking at from the Aramana period, though. We have Akhenaten's mom. We have his wife, his mom, and him. This is Tia. Tia was Akhenaten's mother. This bust was originally done before his reign began, and it was remodeled to fit the Aramana style after his reign began. He did have her original silver headdress covered up with a wig, presumably because that headdress had depictions of gods or goddesses on it, so he didn't want it on display. So that wig was added afterwards. But once again, we see a lot of details going on here. You can kind of see one of her earrings of lapis lazuli and gold poking out here. She has another earring on this side, it's just covered up. But in comparison to Nefertiti's, she does look a bit wizened. Wizened. She looks older. But she was older. It is a shame that he had her headdress covered up. Presumably her headdress also was made of gold and like silver and had a lot of detailing on it, but we don't know. People have done x-rays to try and figure out exactly what's going on under there. You might also notice skin tone. It is presumed that Tia had a darker complexion than, say, Nefertiti. And some last bit before we get into Tutankhamun, who was Akhenaten's relative. The family, whole family together. And I'm going to ask you a question before we get into this. So thus far, we've seen Akhenaten, we've seen Nefertiti, we've seen Mama Tia, and now we're seeing Akhenaten with his daughters. What is something that you're noticing as we're going through the Aramana style that we've not seen before, as far as subject matter?
There's more depiction of women.
Women?
You saw like I can't pronounce her name.
Menkare's wife, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she was depicting herself as a man.
Yeah, and Hatshepsut, yeah.
So now we're seeing like women as they are.
Yes.
So maybe
Yeah.
it's more progressive
Mhm.
where they have a little more. Like,
Yeah,
social
possibly.
status.
They aren't shown as like smaller, minor figures. We're also seeing more casual, normal, like family things happening here, particularly with this image. So this is another sunken relief, and it shows the pharaoh in a way the pharaoh had never been depicted before, playing with his daughters. Not normal for a pharaoh to be shown as a regular human that actually wants to spend time with their family. So very different subject matter pops up along with this major change in art style during the Aramana period. In case you're wondering who's who, they all look like aliens. They are not. This is Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The daughters are shown, the oldest one being the largest, the youngest one being the smallest. He is holding the oldest daughter and kissing her here. The middle daughter is sitting on her mother's lap, and the youngest daughter is playing with Nefertiti's earring. It's a totally normal family scene. I mean, besides the fact they look like aliens. Of course, over top is Aken, the sun god, who is raining down upon him and blessing the family. That's a little not normal. Of course, some of you already know this, but the Aramana period ends with Akhenaten's death. It was very short-lived. And when he dies, everything goes back to normal. Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten from a minor wife. He ends up inheriting the throne, and in 1922, his tomb was discovered untouched by Howard Carter. It was perfectly preserved. Grave robbers did not know it was there, so they didn't steal anything. He died before his actual tomb was finished. So he was buried in a minor tomb. So grave robbers didn't think to rob it. So everything was still there, including the outer sarcophagi, the inner sarcophagi, and the funerary mask. There are 3 layers to this coffin. The outermost layer made of the cheapest materials, the innermost layer made of the most expensive materials. In fact, the innermost coffin is made of a 1/4 ton of gold.
I've seen that in person.
Oh yeah? I haven't.
That's cool.
They used to go on tour and then
Yeah.
it got damaged and they quit.
I saw it in Dallas.
Yeah.
We had it there for a little
Yeah, it got
while.
damaged on one of its trips to the US and they quit letting it travel after that, which makes sense. I mean, like, it's kind of important. I wouldn't want it to get damaged. But it does show here the transition back into your traditional Egyptian art style, but we do still have some hints of the Aramana style, like a little bit of facial expression, not a lot of facial expression, but a little, which was more than what we had before the Aramana style. Meaning, by face, I am talking about the fact that Tutankhamun looks like a kid, not like a grown man. And this is the innermost coffin. It has that gold as well as inlays of enamel and precious stones like lapis lazuli. Of course, the funerary mask is just as detailed. They did switch back to polytheism as soon as Akhenaten died. Really, everything went back to the usual system after Akhenaten died. He is shown wearing traditional pharaoh's garb again. That really tall crown disappears. We go back to the headdress with the 2 cobras and the fake beard. He even moved the capital back to Thebes. So for anyone that was a fan of the Aramana style, it was short. If anyone didn't like the Aramana style, it's okay because it was short. Tutankhamun's tomb, like I said, had everything in it, including things like war chests, cups, really anything that you would ever want. This is called the war chest, but funny enough, Tutankhamun never went to war. So every image on this shows Tutankhamun going into war, hunting animals, things like that, doing things that he never actually did because he was too little. Not that anyone really knows that though. So on this front part here, you can see Tutankhamun is riding in a chariot, leading his men and their chariots off into battle. The enemy is shown in a chaotic ramble out here. These smaller sides over here depict him hunting wildlife in the middle of the desert. He never hunted wildlife in the middle of the desert. But it really shows him as the ideal pharaoh form, this brave man that's willing to go to war and go into the wilderness to do things like hunt, even though he never actually did. Of course, all mummies would have been buried with the Scroll of the Dead, or the Book of the Dead, including Tutankhamun. We don't have too many well-preserved copies, though. This one was found in the tomb of Hunnefer. And instead of watching the video, I'll just tell you what's happening here. So what the Scroll of the Dead contained was the actual process of mummification, as well as what happened to your soul when you died. In Egyptian mythology, when you die, your soul is weighed against a feather on the scales of judgment. If your soul weighs more than the feather, means you are an evil person. You are not going to get to go into the afterlife. You're going to go somewhere else that's not pleasant. If your soul balances with the feather, then you're good. You get to go into the afterlife. Congratulations. This image here that's cut out shows that Hunifer's soul equaled the weight of the feather. So he gets to go into the afterlife. And that's just one story that would be on the Scroll of the Dead. Like I said, the whole process of mummification is also on it. Really, what happens when you die, the process your body goes through, and then what happens to your soul. And it would be stuck inside the fabric that you would be wrapped in. Okay, so during the first millennium, Egypt lost control to the Assyrians. The Assyrians left mayors in charge of Egypt while they ruled from far away. One mayor was Mentuhmet. He started rebuilding all of the Egyptian temples that the Assyrians destroyed when they were invading. And in those temples, he installed sculptures of himself posing like a pharaoh, even though he wasn't a pharaoh. He was a mayor, like a temporary person ruling for someone else. Due to this, we have dozens of his sculptures today of him. He considered himself the fourth prophet of Amen, which is what the inscriptions say down below. And this is the statue that the Greeks would have encountered when they first began trading with the Egyptians. And I'm saying that because we're going to be talking about the Greeks next week. So you're going to see a lot of things that will be used by the Greeks in this statue. We're going to copy a lot of things about this statue, particularly the pose. His face does show signs of aging. He looks old, but the rest of his body does not. The Greeks are not going to copy the old face. They don't like aging. They prefer that style of making people look youthful. But as you probably caught on, for over 2,000 years, Egyptians' art style hasn't really changed. They are the only culture in art history to have art that has not changed for that long. They win for being the same for the longest. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. I like Egyptian art sometimes. But briefly, when right before the Assyrians invaded, Egypt was conquered by the kingdom of Kush. I hinted at that earlier when we were looking at the map. Kush is known more commonly as Nubia. The Nubians were your like non-Egyptian looking Africans. They were like what you think of when you think of an African. Mm-hmm. And they changed the art style to reflect what they actually look like, which I kind of appreciate. It's a very short period of time. You can see here that the Kushite pharaoh that took over Egypt at the time, Taharqa, he copied the idea of a sphinx like Khafre did. He saw Khafre's sphinx and wanted to be a sphinx himself. But instead of doing your traditional Egyptian face, he actually used his normal facial characteristics of larger cheeks and different shaped mouth than the Egyptians traditionally had. So we have some more African features added in. This is going to work vice versa. So the Africans adopt Egyptian motifs, and the Egyptians, for a brief period when Kushite was in control, adopt some African motifs. And I know today it's weird to think that Egypt was like different from Africa, but they looked very different and they did things very differently from the rest of Africa, which we will be talking about the rest of Africa in this class. So, but some of the features are obviously still kind of generic, like the headdress and the pose, your traditional generic style. Now, in summary, what is one sentence that you'd use to describe Egyptian art? If you're going to describe it to someone that's never seen it before.
This will just start and the long string that hasn't been
Yeah. What else? Anyone else?
done.
Stone. A lot of stone, yeah.
Sculpture,
Sculptures, a lot of sculptures.
writing, mathematics.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyone else have a sentence that they can think of?
Just fairly consistent in style and material.
Yeah. Very, very much consistent in style and materials. Anyone else?
They wanted to show their talent.
Yeah, they did. They cared a lot about showing off how important they were. Definitely. And some works of art that you found interesting. We don't need three, just like one. One's good.
the, the,
Hatshepsut.
yeah, whatever,
Yeah, I think that was interesting too.
put it right there in it.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Anyone else? I know I'm making you do a little mini review.
I mean, I don't know how I feel about the fact that, I don't know, that he wanted to go from polytheistic to.
Oh, Akhenaten. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I appreciate that, because he was worshiping just the one God, like, how that influenced the art style to
Yeah.
be more androgynous.
It's crazy to think how just a religious change can change so many other things. But all of these cultures that we're talking about in this class, religion is extremely important to them. So it makes sense, but it's also crazy to think that it can make that much of an impact. Yeah. Tomorrow, we are going to be looking at the Aegeans. They won't take nearly as long. It's a pretty short chapter. I'm sorry. But it's the Minoans and the Cycladic people and the Mycenaeans that we're going to be looking at. So the Greeks before the Greeks. So look forward to that. We're going to see obviously some more profile stuff.
That's what I have on there.